we announce
Titles. Yes. For the recording, Case 35, Rakuto's Acquiescence, Book of Equanimity. Preface to the Assembly. Swift action and fluent speech crush heretics and demons. Going beyond formalities and transcending sectarianism is expediently used for a superior, clever person. What happens when you encounter a man who doesn't turn his head even when struck a blow with a stick? Main case. Attention. Rakuto went to visit Kasan. Without bowing, he stood and faced him. Kasan remarked, "A chicken lives in a phoenix nest. He is not in the same class. Get out." Rakuto said, "Your fame has made me come from afar. I beg your indulgence." Kasan replied, "There's no one before me, and no old monk here." At that, Rakuto gave a shout. Kasan said, "Stop, stop. You shouldn't rattle on like that. The moon and the clouds are the same. Valleys and mountains are different. It's not that you can't cut off tongue tips of everyone under heaven, but how can you make a tongueless person able to talk?" Rakuto had no reply. Kasan struck him. Henceforth, Rakuto acquiesced. Appreciatory verse. Head wagging, tail swishing, the red-finned carp could utterly and independently change its form. Though he has had technique to cut off tongue tips, he was subtly led by the nose to realize mind. Illuminating night outside the blinds, the moon appears as if at noon. Before the cliff of a withered tree, wildflowers are always in spring. Tongueless man, tongueless man, an intimate phrase fully reveals the right decree. Walking solitary in one's fiefdom, all is clear. May all under heaven be happy and joyful. All right, so in most Asian cultures, bowing is pretty ubiquitous, and not only is it always done, there are subtle differences in the bowing. So I can only speak from my experience with Japanese. If the person you're bowing to is older than you are, then you have to bow lower. Everybody will always bow to each other, but you have to bow lower to the older person or the person who is considered to be superior. The highest ranking tea teacher we had in Los Angeles was only about 4'5", and so whenever I had to bow to her, I had to bend my knees to get, and I'm not tall, so but to get lower than she was a little tricky. And so for someone to not bow at all is considered insulting. And you know this is China, 8th century. You know, the Chinese considered anyone that didn't abide by the Chinese code of culture to be barbarians, and anything that wasn't Chinese was barbarian anyway. But even less so. So when he stood there and didn't bow, that's the first thing that says. So Rakuto went to visit without bowing. He stood and faced him. It's like, whoa, that's some nerve. So, and Kasan rebukes him and says, "A chicken lives in a phoenix nest. He is not in the same class. Get out." But Rakuto stands his ground. Because the pre-story to this is that Rakuto was a Renzai monk who had finished his studies with Renzai and was doing his hermitage. He was living as a hermit and not far from Kasan's temple. Kasan was a Soto teacher, and Kasan heard about him and sent him a letter. I don't know what was in that letter, But he sends them a letter and sends his assistant with a letter to Rakuto, and the assistant delivers the letter. Rakuto takes the letter, does not read it, but then holds his hands out for more and says to the attendant, "Do you have anything else for me?" Which is probably not an unusual gesture. In that day, it was considered also culturally correct to give food to any of the hermitage monks or the monks who were begging for food. Like, as a matter of fact, the word tokudo, which is priest ordination, carries the connotation of one who is qualified to receive alms, so they can be trusted that they're going to use those alms. Usually, they would, the tradition was they would go out to the community and beg for food and money, and they'd bring it back to the monastery, and they would share all of that. So that was part of the whole culture that was there. So, Kasan sends them this letter, and so the attendant comes back and tells Kasan what happened, and Kasan's response was, well, if he reads the letter, he'll be here in 3 days. If he doesn't read the letter, then no one can help him. He read the letter, showed up in 3 days, but obviously with an attitude. So, you called me, so what do you want? So he in his response to Kasan's rebuke and his order to get out was pretty well handled. He said, well, because you're so famous and highly regarded, I traveled here at your request. Hint, hint.
We can't tell if he's being sarcastic. We don't know in what tone he said it.
We don't. But it can be implied from the fact that he didn't bow. Because he's obviously not, he did that on purpose.
Right.
So that something's up with the fact that he didn't bow. Right. So he begs his indulgence.
That's what I'm saying. The begging of indulgence could be said in a sarcastic way.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
He's there kind of, you called me, so why am I here?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you want? Great
play
teacher.
This game.
Great teacher. Yeah.
Renowned monk here. Here I am.
Yeah. So another good response, Kasan replies, "There's no one before me and no old monk here." So this is the invocation of the no self that is also common in Zen, because it's that part of ourselves, that part of the ego, that is exactly what we work on killing off when we do Zazen. That there is no fixed self that is present at any point. We can be whatever is needed to be at any given point, and can respond to whatever needs to be responded to. So he obviously comes, Rakuto comes in, no bowing, and then stays after being ordered to leave. So there's some hope here for Rakuto. It's like, okay, he's standing his ground. His truth is right where he is. So not half bad. And then there's no one before me and no monk here, so I am no one and you are no one. Now what? And Rakuto gives the traditional Rinzai response. Ha! It's that space of being before words. But it's also very cliche. And an indication of a practitioner who really hasn't gone very far. He learned all the right responses, but really isn't living the practice. So that's where he's stuck, is in Rinzai's shout. But how did he use that shout? How is he living? How is he taking care of things? How is he doing out there in the rest of the world? And obviously not so good, because it seems like he's a little bit stuck. And there's some indication in the verse that, where did it go? There was something about 3 years. So he'd been living as as a, on this hermitage for 3 years, which is long enough. And usually that was kind of normal, that you'd finish your studies, you'd go live in a hermitage, but you would go back to teach or to work, you go back to the community to give back to the community, because you spent probably 20, 30 years taking from the community. So here he is, he's been summoned back to the community. And he obviously, he returns, but takes him a bit. He's got to get over himself. So with the shout, in response to the shout, it's like, really? Stop. I've heard that many times. Not enough. Stop. You shouldn't rattle on like that. The moon and the clouds are the same, the valleys and the mountains are different. It's not that you can't cut off tongue tips. So he's acknowledging that he's got some good basis in his practice. He can cut off tongue tips, but he's missing the other half. How can you make a tongueless person able to talk? So there are two aspects of the practice that must be. It's that relative and absolute that is in constant play, in constant exchange, because the two of them come together. The absolute form, yes, you have the quiet silence in which you are dealing with all of your demons and getting rid of this very fixed idea you have of yourself. But the other part is, how are you going to use that? Once you've accomplished that, how do you then use that practice? How are you giving back? How are you functioning in the community? So how can he be of help to someone who can't speak, who hasn't spoken, a tongueless person able to talk? Rakuto couldn't respond to that. It's like, okay, kind of acknowledged it, and Kazan struck him. There's a lot of hitting back in those days. But usually the hitting was done with it's called a hosu, because that's the traditional thing that a teacher holds, and it has horsehair on it. So being hit by a hosu is not going to hurt, but it's symbolically. He struck him with his hosu. And Rakuto acquiesced, realized, okay, I've got something else to learn. He said, it's only when you get past thinking that you know everything that you can learn more. So his acquiescence was important in this koan, to empty yourself of what you think you know. Because we all come to we have these great epiphanies sitting in silence on the cushion. When you're in a container that supports the sitting, that's quiet and clean, and someone's put out a nice cushion for you, they've lit the incense, lit the candle, and it smells good, it feels good. And then all of these wonderful realizations have the space to come forward and for you to realize. But what about when that container is gone? What about when you walk outside, when you walk into the community, when you walk back into the marketplace, when you go to work, when you're with your family? What then? What realizations are there? What practice? How does your practice function when you're out and about? That's the other half. That's the relative side. So yes, the absolute is good, but getting stuck in the absolute just leaves out half of your life. The relative, also good, but not experiencing that absolute is missing the other half also. So it's a package deal. And we've talked about this many times, that the absolute, the emptiness, very seductive. It's because it's so peaceful, nothing's missing, everything is wonderful, and we're all one, and we're all, we should all just get along in that space of the emptiness. There's nothing that disturbs that. But indeed, how do you handle things that are disturbing, those shadow parts of ourselves, those negative aspects? Because those are equally as human and equally as important, to have those come forth and to deal with, so that you have that balance to use when you're dealing with other people. Because if you're all pure and holy, and everyone else isn't, what good are you? So that aspect of the relative, the world out there where there is right and wrong and good and bad and glad and sad, all those emotions that normal people have every day are also part of practice. This practice does not exclude anything. Enlightenment does not exclude delusion. What enlightenment does is allow you to use delusion as an effective tool. That's the expedient means. And that's what this practice is. It is not one aspect, one small aspect of the practice is getting to the cushion daily. And the other half of the practice is taking what you got on the cushion out into the world and using it effectively. And that's the harder work. So Buddha's enlightenment was, that realization of, seeing the morning star was just one small aspect of his enlightenment. The second aspect was him getting up from under the Bodhi tree and going to talk to people that probably didn't want to hear from him because he had just gone against everything he'd been practicing as an ascetic. But that's what he did. And then 40 more years of teaching after that. The building of 3 monasteries. So he got out there and did the work, and he was by all processes and stories. He used his privilege as a prince to attract money, because you have to have money to build 3 monasteries and to support the monks and to do what he needed to do. So he was quite the businessman. He worked in the marketplace to continue the practice, along with, while he was doing his 40 years of journeying around India and teaching for those 40 years, to the point that he, he's in his 80s at this point. He's being offered food that he knew was tainted. It wasn't lettuce this time, but as we're now dealing with, because foodborne pathogens are quite common. But he knew that the food was bad enough that he told his other people that were with him, his disciples, don't eat this. He ate it and died of dysentery. And dysentery, I understand, is a horribly painful death. So died on the streets of dysentery as a result of food that was given to him. And it depends on which version of the story you read. If you're vegetarian, it was mushrooms. If you're not vegetarian, it was pork. So choose your story. Both of them had him dead by the end of that. So we don't regard the Buddha. Now, there are some schools of Buddhism that actually regard Buddha as a god and regard him as being immortal. The Zen school does not. He was a teacher, a very important teacher, but he was born and he did die. There's also the story about his virgin birth, also probably apocryphal, but these stories keep people's attention. But and when he was born, he took 7 steps. Well, he was born. Cherry blossoms rained down from was it cherry blossoms or rose petals? Some kind of flower rained down from the sky, and he took 7 steps, pointed to the heaven and the earth, and said, "I alone in the world honored one." I don't think he was talking as a newborn, but I'm sure someone made up that story as a way of attracting people to the practice, and it's effective. And it doesn't, in the long run, it doesn't matter. What matters is your life. How does the teachings of the Buddha show up in your life, in your practice, in your going back and out to the marketplace? That's the more important aspect. The Buddha wasn't above a little bit of, how do I describe this without calling it lying? because he told his cousin that if he joined him, he would have his 42 virgins when he got to heaven. It worked because he got his cousin to come and help out. And hopefully through his practice, he got over the need for the 42 virgins. So, but there was a lot of that kind of talk because it was what the culture did at that point. It's very similar to what a lot of religions do, and people either believe it or they don't, and they're attracted to it or they're not. So all that for me just makes the practice just that much more human because it's what human beings do. Like
they were Mandarava flowers.
Mandarava.
Yeah.
I don't. What is a Mandarava flower?
I think they. You know? I mean, from India. Mandarava. Mythical heavenly flower in Buddhist texts that is said to rain from the sky during divine moments. And it's...
so it's not even a flower that's real.
And today they associate it with the coral tree flower. Or the white manjusaka flower.
Okay.
So a coral tree, I think they're the trees with the slats on the trunk.
Yeah.
I heard of similar kind of like when other gods born or thing, they get married, the flowers come from the sky.
So those auspicious, importantly spiritual times.
Yeah.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
So I don't think cherry trees grow naturally in
India. Oh, sorry, my Japanese influence.
Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, if he was born in Japan, it would have been cherry blossoms.
Yeah.
So how do you pronounce it? Mandarava.
Mandarava.
I got to remember that. Mandarava or Rava?
Mandarava.
VA. Okay, Mandarava. Thank you for looking that up. Yeah. Not that I don't mean to be flippant about it. Who cares? What's it?
Because I actually remember the term, I just wanted to look it up to be sure.
Yeah. So I mean, even if flowers did fall down from the sky when he was born, if he had been a criminal, it wouldn't have mattered. But he lived his life, and these stories are made up retroactively, and I'm sure that's how these stories got formed. Because there's very little, not nothing, but there's very little written that's contemporary to the time of the Buddha. Most of it appears earliest like 100 years later. Then the majority of the literature we have really came after we got to China. So after the turn of the first millennium, you begin to see more and more of what was going on. And there was a lot of translation as well of the Sanskrit and Pali texts into Chinese at that time. So it really wasn't accessible. What was accessible were people living their lives. And people saw how the Buddha lived his life. People saw how the other Buddhist practitioners lived their lives, because they were out and about and with people and talking to people and taking care of people. I'm sure that if he had not been, if he had not had that influence at the time, those beautiful stories would not have been created later. So it's a credit to him that he's had, retroactively had this auspicious birth. Not such a great death. But here we are, the living Buddhas. The teaching has come down 2,500 years, and we are continuing that practice. We're continuing to do the practice and walk that teaching, teach that practice, which is emblematic in how we train. It's, we do the sitting to gain that enlightenment, and then kinhin, which is our word for walking meditation, means walking truth. So it's taking what you've gained on the cushion and putting it into an everyday practice. First slow kinhin, and then regular paced walking. And then if you're living at the monastery, the next step would be work practice. So you now apply the practice to doing work. So it was never intended to just be this solo sitting away from people and everything else. It was designed specifically to be lived, to be worked with. So Rakuto had the first part. He had the sitting down, he had the practice down, he had the cliches down, but he didn't have the other half, and acknowledged that with his acquiescence to continuing his training with Kasan. So hats off to him. Not that, but when in a bowing culture, bow, because it's what's appropriate to do. All right, questions? Yes.
So, how do you understand the phrase tongueless man, an intimate phrase, fully reveals the right decree, which kind of refers to the main case, where his Rakuto was asked, how can you make a tongueless person able to talk?
Right. So the adage that's used in Zen, that how will you use this practice, and the answer to that is give life and take it away. So, meaning that the taking away part is that absolute part, the getting rid of the self, getting rid of who you think you are, those fixed ideas, which is what he was adept at, cutting that off. So cutting off those negative thoughts, those very stuck identifiers, that's the absolute. The relative part is, now that you've got that, now that you're tongueless, now what? How now do you go out and talk about this? How do you teach? How do you work? How do you relate? How do you now, be a human being among human beings? And how do you make a tongueless person able to talk? So all that silence is just one half of it. Being able to relate effectively with other people and with the teaching is the other part. That's the part that Rakuto was missing. So that intimate phrase that fully reveals the right decree. So the one thing that we tell people, yes, you're supposed to get rid of, when thoughts arise in Zazen, you set them aside, or you let them go, breathe them out, as you picture them as clouds that are just passing by. Because for the most part, most of what we're thinking is pretty meaningless. But there are these shadow sides of ourselves, these negative parts of ourselves. Those parts of ourselves are equally as important, because we learn more about ourselves with those shadow sides than we do with the sides we like. So the sides we don't like, what is that? Why is that? What's coming up with that? Just shoving it aside and putting it into shadow, it takes on a life of its own. So you do have to take care of that side of yourself as well, in order to, not only to bring those negative things into the light for the purpose of healing, but also to make it that much easier to relate to people, because everyone's got these sides, and you have to be able to effectively understand what people are bringing to you, what people are talking to you about, and how to speak effectively to people who have that balance. So being unbalanced in that way, being only able to function in silence, just gives you that half practice that isn't quite mature. So that's what that is referring to. Disagreements, dissensions? Yes?
As you know, I did take notes, so I wrote down one thing that you were saying in the screen,
Mm-hmm.
and it was enlightenment does not exclude delusion. Enlightenment allows you to use delusion as an effective tool. And so my question is, how does that fit into the vow that we say at the end of this practice? Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them.
Right. So, what you're ending with all of those vows is separation. So, when you're not separate from something, it's not there. So, when you're totally human, or when you're totally involved in a delusion, if, let's say an extreme case, a religious cult. If you believe that is the truth, then there's nothing that anybody can tell you that doesn't say that. So how do you relate to someone who is in that place? You have to be able to understand that aspect of yourself as well. Otherwise, you continue to perpetuate separation from people who do believe in delusion. So you end the separation from delusion with the end, and that's the end of it. Because you can be deluded. And that was a famous quote from Maizumi Roshi, because he was asked at he was at some conference or some meeting, and someone asked him, Maizumi Roshi, are you enlightened? And he said, no, I'm thoroughly deluded. So that ending something doesn't mean that you get rid of it. It means you absorb it, you become it, and you're not separate from it. But the enlightened part of that is that it's now a useful tool, and it doesn't run you, but it allows you to relate to people who have, and we all have delusions. There's no really getting rid of delusions, but there is this total absorption of the delusion to the point that you can now use it effectively. So it's a little counterintuitive. Same thing with saving all sentient beings. The first one of those. If everything is perfect, whole, and complete, what are you saving them from? So wrapping yourself in these axioms and thinking that what's perfect, whole, and complete excludes everything else that you don't think is perfect, whole, and complete is the delusion itself. So if indeed everything is perfect, whole, and complete, then so is the Trump administration. And how now do you use how do you relate to the Trump administration if indeed it's something that your politics don't agree with? How can you be effective in that situation? And that stands as a question, and I have no answers to that. So, but that's if the world is happening as it should be happening, we have this full spectrum of humanity to deal with. That just happens to be the spectrum of humanity that's in power right now. It's not that it wasn't there before, because it's always been there. But now that it's here, now that it's in our face, how do we deal with it? How do we use our practice to not separate from those things that we disagree with? And if you look deeply enough, you'll find those same aspects within yourself. And sometimes you need, and I think the same thing, what happened with even Maizumi Roshi, who everyone, put on a pedestal and held up as a very great teacher, certainly fell far from grace, with the affairs that he had. Those that stuck around realized that it was a very important thing to learn. What doesn't work? And so that lesson continues to reverberate through our lineage. So we know, and we have now practices in place to effectively handle things when they go south, because they go south. That's the nature of life, is that they will not always be as we want them to be. And it doesn't take, a large group of people. How many times does a manager come to me and say, "Why am I having so much trouble? I've only got 2 or 3 employees." I'm like, well, that's why, because you have 2 or 3 employees.
More than one.
You have more than one. Or even if you had one, there'll still be you and that employee. So wherever there is always trouble. And every day is a good day. A good day is a day that you can effectively deal with that trouble and continue to be effective as you deal with the trouble. So, yeah, ending is, and there are other translations of that. I think, I can't remember, Sweetwater has a different way of reciting those vows. But it's much more about dissolving the ideas that separate us from anything and everything else. So if we have this idea that I'm enlightened and you're deluded, that's the separation that needs to be dissolved. That is not real, and that's where the work is. And you can only know that if you get out there and talk to people. You'll get to find out where they are and how they feel, and what's going on with them. And then you get to figure out how to relate to them, or not. But important to recognize that those dark sides, and understand that if whoever they are have some idea of where they are as being right and where you are as being wrong, you're the deluded person from their perspective. So can you bridge that gap? Can you step into their perspective? And which now gives them an opening to step into your perspective. And there the sharing is. There the delusions end. That connection. And we are all connected. There's no way out of that connection. We create these divisions, we create these separations, and they are all artificial. And the work is, especially when we're living in a culture that not only perpetuates but traffics in these divisions. People are making all kinds of money and creating all kinds of things to keep us separate from each other. There's not a lot of reward for doing this practice, as you can tell by the thousands of people that are here doing this practice. So yeah, enlightenment is about not separating. But thank you for asking that question, because we recite that all the time, and it's by rote, and a lot of times we don't think about it. What does that mean? How does that show up in my life? It's one thing to have the precepts memorized, another thing to really look very carefully and see how they show up in your everyday dealings with everything that happens in life. So same thing with the promises we make. How does it show up? How do we use the practice? That's why there's no end to it. You're never done. I'm never done. And there's always more to learn, more to get. All right.
Well, if we have to end up saying that the Trump administration is perfect as it is, I'm going to be here a long time.
Well, that's good. A lot of work, yeah, and there's some things that require more work than others. And certainly as we have seen, things that cause that much harm, intentionally cause that much harm, are very difficult to face. But the question always comes back: how am I that? And if that is a part of who I am, and that's not a part that I want to to express in the world, what do I do? How do I teach myself first? How do I end that separation within myself first? And then that gives you the tools to then bridge that gap with others. Not that it would ever be easy. No one ever said this was easy. It's this constant level of hard work. All right, we've got a little bit of a move to talk about. Any final questions before we get to that brief conversation? Kirk, anything? Okay, great. All right, close. Thank you, everybody.